Tonight, devastation beyond imagination.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
The latest on the damage caused by one of the most intense hurricanes in Florida history. Plus, while the GDP drops, unemployment falls to 5-month lows. We'll take a look at all things economic. And the debate over a national abortion ban heads to the House.
This is a moral, spiritual, and religious issue for countless millions.
What lawmakers are saying about the pro-life push being seen on Capitol Hill. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The shocking sights and sounds of a catastrophic storm. Good evening and welcome to Faith Nation. In Washington, I'm Caitlin Burke. Houses and cars floating away, storm surges of 12 to 18 feet. Hurricane Ian will be remembered as one of the worst storms to ever hit the state of Florida, and it's not done with the United States yet. While the storm is temporarily out to sea, states from Georgia to Virginia preemptively declaring emergencies and bracing for when Ian makes landfall again. CBN News White House correspondent Abigail Robertson brings us tonight's top story on what's to come and how state and federal governments are responding to the damage. Abigail?
Well, Caitlin, today President Biden spoke with Governor Ron DeSantis and told him that he's approving a Florida disaster declaration that makes federal funds available to 9 counties in Florida decimated by Hurricane Ian. DeSantis says he's grateful, and he predicts that even more counties in the state will need federal assistance in the coming days.
The amount of water that's been rising and will likely continue to rise today, even as the storm is passing, is basically a 500-year flood event.
Hurricane Ian marks the 5th strongest hurricane to ever hit the American mainland. At least 2.5 million Floridians are without power, a number DeSantis expects to grow.
People should just understand this storm is having broad impacts across the state, and some of the flooding you're going to see in areas hundreds of miles from where this made landfall are going to set records.
With search and rescue missions underway in southwest Florida, DeSantis urged that residents who evacuate wait to return to keep roadways clear for first responders. Those who stayed to ride out the storm witnessed dangerous flooding, sharks swimming in the streets, doors buckling under water pressure, and large boats floating away in the wind.
4 of them. 4 boats.
Homes were swept away, too.
That house halfway underwater, there goes my car floating away.
Naples firefighters worked to salvage supplies when the fire station became inundated with over 3 feet of water. Under Florida's disaster declaration, the federal government will help cover costs to rebuild public buildings like schools and fire stations and costs of clearing debris.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
President Biden claimed Thursday, while exact numbers are unclear, early reports indicate a substantial loss of life.
My message to the people of Florida and to the country is, at times like this, America comes together. We're going to pull together as one team, as one America. We're going to do everything we can to provide whatever they need.
And in the days to come, even more states might be seeking assistance from the federal government, like South Carolina, which is now on hurricane watch, with Hurricane Ian expecting to make landfall there as a Category 1 on Friday. Reporting from the White House, Abigail Robertson.
Ian is moving out to sea, but as Abigail reported, it's not done with the U.S. yet. For more on that, we turn to Anthony Reynes, a meteorologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Anthony, what's next for this storm?
Well, Ian has finally moved out of the Florida Peninsula. We can see in this radar image and radar and satellite image that the center of the hurricane has now moved over the Atlantic waters. That is bad news for people in Georgia, because it means that now Ian has a chance to regroup again. We're not expecting it to become another Cat 4 or Category 5, another major hurricane like it was when it hit Cape Coral when it hit the Fort Myers area in western Florida, but it's going to be close to a Category 1 hurricane again. So people in Georgia will likely have to prepare to deal with tropical storm force winds with at least wind gusts up to hurricane force. And then, of course, that storm surge that is accompanying the center of Ian, and we saw the absolute devastation that it caused here in the west coast of Florida.
How would you advise people who are now going to find themselves in Ian's path when it makes landfall again?
Well, basically, from the 5-day cone, we can see that it's mostly, basically the entire coastline is right now under either tropical storm warning or hurricane warnings. So everybody that is right there along the coast, if you have houses, if you live on the coastline, even if you have just a vacation property there, make sure that you have to evacuate those zones. The power of Ian has been already, we have seen it in display here in Florida. And the storm surge is not expected to get as high as it did in Fort Myers, in Charlotte County here in Florida. We're still talking about potential for 4 to 6 feet all along the coastline. 6 feet is basically the height of your first floor, of the first floor of a structure along the coast. So you have to take this seriously. This is still a very powerful and dangerous storm. And we haven't even talked about the rain, which is expected to cause major flooding along the southern coast.
How do you think we'll look back in history at the impact of this storm?
We can call it historic. Number one, it's one of the very few major hurricanes that has hit the west coast of Florida basically in the last 100 years. But also it's the kind of damage that we are seeing. We have seen very few cases where we see this widespread, massive destruction along coastal locations in one same state. And not only we saw significant destruction in the west coast of Florida because of the eye wall and the storm surge, but also on the eastern side of Florida, we're still seeing massive flooding, including that famous area of Orlando that is, it's the #1 tourist attraction here in the state. Right now, Orlando had over 1 foot of rain, and surrounding areas, including Daytona Beach and Cape Canaveral, they registered almost 2 feet of water. So this is a catastrophic flooding event.
NOAA's Anthony Reynes, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
CBN's Brody Carter is on the ground in Orlando, a mainland city directly in the path of Hurricane Ian. As weather cleanup begins there, a local pastor is encouraging those who are facing life storms.
Here in Orlando, about 5 miles away from Walt Disney World, the wind and rain still a very serious threat as that storm makes its way out of the area, but also flooding. That's what I'm talking about right here. Despite all that, despite the ongoing nature of this storm, the highway seems to be getting back to normal. Many families headed back to the southwest coast to check on family members and also see what's left of their property after that devastating storm. But it's not just the wind and the rain, because now it's a tropical storm. It's about 73 miles an hour of high winds. That's the possibility within the nature of that storm. So that's not the serious threat. Now it's flooding issues. It's also the potential for flash flooding and tornado threats throughout the region. Look at this retention pond over here. These are all over the area here in Orlando for situations just like this. And it's spilling over into this causeway, and there's just nowhere for the water to go. So again, the threat is very real, as even though the nature of this storm, the most devastating impacts of the storm have gone, this is what we're left with, and it's going to keep going and continue for the next 24 hours. Now, I had a chance to speak with the local pastor. He telling me here in the Orlando area, he was stuck, hunkered down in the dark, talking to me about the situation at hand, how his congregation was just very much heartbroken over the nature and the situation of this state. He was stuck in the dark, telling me a horrible story about his mother, who didn't understand that the 90 miles from Tampa to her home where the storm hit didn't know it was going to happen, so she was stuck hunkering down in the storm. Thankfully, she's okay. He's still worrying about the property and what he's going to go back home to, preparing for the worst but hoping for the best, much like the state of Florida. But he still tells me, even though there is a storm raging on, we're going to get through this together in Florida. We're going to get through this with the grace of God.
As believers in the Lord Jesus Christ, as the Church of Jesus Christ, we have this amazing comfort and peace that actually gives us the strength during the storm and after the storm. And, even as I'm talking to you right now and whoever's listening, I want to encourage them. The Lord is with you. God is with you in the middle of the storm, no matter what your trial is. It may be a physical hurricane, or it may be something spiritual in your life that you're going through. The devastation is far-reaching. We will see more as this storm continues to make its way to the Atlantic coast and as Operation Blessing continues to help those who are most affected by this storm. Brody Carter, CBN News.
From the GDP to high Wall Street woes, the latest on the American economy next. New GDP numbers out today confirm the U.S. economy shrank for a second straight quarter. Historically, 2 consecutive quarters of decline signaled the country's in a recession, though that's not been officially declared. The Bureau of Economic Analysis reports the economy shrank at an annual rate of 0.6% during the second quarter of the year, putting it in contraction for the entire first half of 2022. New jobless claims hit a 5-month low. According to today's figures from the Labor Department, 193,000 Americans applied for new unemployment benefits last week. That's down about 16,000 from the week before and the lowest level of applications since April. Overall, about 1.3 million people are receiving jobless benefits across the country. Here with us now to explain what those numbers mean is Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, with so many questions about the economy, should people be encouraged to see the unemployment applications falling?
We'll take good news when we can get it, Kaylin, and the job market in the sense of providing job security and opportunities for Americans is one source of positivity in this economy. On the other hand, some might view the job market as a source of tension because it can be generating inflation. We have a mismatch between the more than 11 million job openings and the 6 million who are unemployed, and so that is seen as an imperfect imbalance.
Next week, we'll get the September jobs report. What are you expecting?
Well, because we're coming into this, Kaylin, with low jobless claims, we have every reason to believe that the monthly employment report that we get a week from tomorrow will look similarly stable or robust. And this is quite remarkable because, as you said in the lead-in, we've had these less than encouraging growth numbers regarding GDP in the first half of the year. Yet the job market is basically flashing essentially a green light. So, as has been the case for more than 2.5 years now, a lot of unprecedented cross currents are occurring, and the job market is one of those sources of conundrums.
So speaking of the GDP, the latest numbers show 2 straight quarters of decline. That's part of what defines a recession. Are we in one?
Unlikely that that will be declared for the first half of the year, but we'll have to see how the now wrapping up third quarter materializes. Expectations are that we will actually see an acceleration in growth in the third quarter. And then, of course, a lot is up in the air in the final 4 months of the year. One of the biggest sources of concern for me is the strength of the consumer, because we've had this continuing inflation, and the consumer's ability to weather that storm is perhaps suspect at this point. We've not had wage gains to keep up with it. And if indeed employers begin to ratchet back, that will then sort of knock that job market foundation out from under the economy. And that's when we'll have some real concern. I would say out over the next 12 to 15 to 18 months, most economists do believe we'll see a weakening of the job market.
Well, Wall Street is reacting, the Dow dropping 458 points and S&P down more than 2%. Quickly, Mark, what explains the turbulence?
high inflation and the outlook for more interest rate hikes coming from the Federal Reserve. And there have been a lot of strange things happening with the U.S. dollar being at the strongest level in years, and some policy conflicts or mistakes coming out of England, as well as the outlook for a rough winter in Europe at large.
All right, Mark Hamrick, we appreciate your time as always. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Turning now to the 2022 midterm elections, many Democrats say abortion is the issue shaping the vote, with the Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade emboldening voters to head to the polls. But Republicans say the biggest issues are immigration, crime, and most importantly, the economy. For more on that, we're joined by CBN News chief political analyst David Brody. David, with the economy in what some call a state of recession, how big of an issue is that to people as they head to the polls?
Well, it is the issue. There's a lot of other ancillary issues around this, but look, the economy has always been the issue in election after election. It was James Carville back in the 90s, the former Democrat strategist for Bill Clinton, who said, famously, it's the economy, stupid. And that has not changed in 30 plus years. It'll always be the economy. And then everything else around it either compounds it or makes it better or worse. And so there are obviously issues that Democrats have beyond just the economy. The culture is going to you-know-what in a handbasket. And so they've got to deal with that. And they've got upset parents, many of them independent parents in the suburbs that are concerned about that. So you put the economy plus a lot of the stuff going on in the culture, and it is not a good prescription for Democrats.
A new poll from ABC News and the Washington Post reports Republicans hold a 16-point lead over Democrats when it comes to trusting them to handle the economy, and a 19-point lead in trust to handle inflation. How significant are those numbers?
Well, they're very significant, and here's why. They're big enough to understand that this is a solid trend. I mean, this has been the case for a very long time, and now we're seeing these numbers just before the midterm elections. So clearly it's a problem for Democrats. But look, also, let's be clear. It's not that all of a sudden Republicans can handle the economy better than Democrats. It's the fact that the economy is, in essence, out of control to a degree. And because of that, Republicans are getting the spoils of that. But let's be honest, if Republicans were in charge and the economy wasn't doing well, then it would be Democrats who voters believe would be entrusted better with the economy. So it really just depends on the economic climate, and that is not good for Democrats heading into the midterms.
Is the White House acknowledging the pressure faced by many Americans because of where the economy's at?
So that's a great question, Caitlin. And so it's a twofold answer, and I'll be very brief on it. There's a private recognition that things are not good, and there's a public recognition that things are just getting better and better and rosier and rosier. The problem is that when you have a public recognition, if you will, to say it's okay, things are going to be fine, that doesn't square with how people are feeling. And I think when you see the disconnect between what Biden and his administration is saying and what voters are feeling, that's the problem right there. I mean, look, you can't lie to, well, you can lie to voters for sure, but I think voters, especially in this economy, are smart enough to understand something is amiss.
When it comes to abortion, many Democrats who may not have cared about voting in the midterms are now fired up. Quickly, could this be what kills a red wave?
I think it dents a red wave, potentially. It doesn't kill it. I think there's going to be a wave, most likely, in November. I think the question is just how big. And I think abortion takes down some of those numbers a little bit. We'll find out. I may be wrong, but I do sense in all the polling we're seeing that it will help Democrats, but on the margins only. I still think this is going to be a big night for Republicans.
All right, David Brody, thanks for your insights.
Thanks, Caitlin.
Banning abortion across the nation. The debate on Capitol Hill when Faith Nation returns. Democrats are hoping to put abortion at the forefront of the midterm elections, holding a hearing this morning on the impacts of a potential national ban, while pro-life advocates continue to push for uniform restrictions across the country. Capitol Hill correspondent Matt Galka reports.
A handful of bills have already been proposed on Capitol Hill calling for some form of national abortion restriction. And following the Supreme Court's ruling, that issue is far from a settled one here in Washington.
All the scripture references, were known in the womb before they were born. And for us or companies to have policies, laws, or requirements to force people to violate their deeply held religious convictions is just wrong.
Lawmakers went back and forth over the potential for national abortion restrictions. Witnesses included Pittsburgh's Kelsey Lee, who talked about the difficulty making her abortion decision when doctors told her the baby's health was at risk.
If my pregnancy continued, he likely wouldn't have had the ability to swallow. He may not have been able to breathe, and his bones would have broken during delivery, no matter the method.
Lee said she wouldn't have been able to make that decision if there had been any ban in effect under 20 weeks. Pro-life OBGYN Dr. Monique Chereau-Wubenhorst told the committee that there was a difference between treatment of a miscarriage and that it would still be allowed if abortions were not.
Abortion not only poses risk to the mother, it is always lethal to an unborn child. It is my opinion that abortion is not health care.
It's unknown right now how much support a national ban does in fact have among Republicans on Capitol Hill. Many believe that it should be left up to the states, especially after the Supreme Court ruled in the Dobbs decision, while others proposing a national ban believe that ultimately their colleagues would end up siding with them if it did come down to a vote. Matt Gelka, CBN News.
A Michigan man tries to turn a hobby into a history-making record. We'll show you how when Faith Nation returns. When the pandemic hit, some people took time to get in shape, others started baking bread. But for one Michigan man, he took up a hobby with the goal of making history. This could be the world's largest pumpkin. Frank Morse took up growing gourds back during COVID lockdowns. His goal? Break the record for the biggest pumpkin ever. Currently, that stands at 2,702 pounds. Morse's pumpkin weighs in at 2,400 pounds. But don't worry, he's not out of the running yet. The gourd is still growing, and he has time to become the largest pumpkin in the world. You know, I tried to take up cross-stitching during the pandemic. It didn't stick. Good luck, Frank. That's going to do it for Faith Nation. Have a good night.